Jake Harper wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. The twin suns of Haven's Edge were finally dropping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that he'd never seen back on Earth. His shirt stuck to his back, soaked through from another long day working the fields. 40 acres of wheat stretched out before him, golden stalks swaying in the evening breeze. His small herd of cattle grazed in the western pasture, their bells making soft clanging sounds that echoed across the empty land. This was exactly what Jake had wanted when he'd left Earth 3 years ago. No neighbors. No noise. No complications. Just him, his farm, and the quiet. That evening the quiet ended. Jake was checking the eastern fence line when he saw it. Something big lay crumpled in the dirt about 50 yards away, just outside his property. At first he thought maybe one of the colony's transport vehicles had crashed. But as he got closer he realized it was moving. Breathing. It was alive. Jake's heart started pounding. He jogged back to the house and grabbed his rifle from above the door. His hands shook slightly as he loaded it. The colony had assured all the farmers that Haven's Edge had no dangerous predators. Clearly they'd been wrong. He approached slowly, keeping the rifle ready. Every few steps he stopped and listened. The creature hadn't moved much, but Jake could hear its labored breathing now. Deep, rasping sounds that spoke of pain and exhaustion. When he got close enough to see it properly, Jake nearly dropped his rifle. The thing was massive. Easily twice the size of his pickup truck. It looked like a wolf but wrong in every way. 6 legs instead of 4. Fur that seemed to shimmer between gray and deep purple in the fading light. Its head was broader, more powerful than any wolf Jake had ever seen in pictures. And its eyes, those eyes were watching him. Not with animal panic, but with something that looked disturbingly like intelligence. Jake stood there for a full minute, finger near the trigger, trying to decide what to do. The creature wasn't attacking. It was barely moving. Its sides heaved with each difficult breath. Then Jake noticed the belly. Swollen. Distended. He'd grown up on a farm back in Montana. He'd seen plenty of pregnant animals in his life. This thing was heavily pregnant. And from the look of things not doing well. Ah hell, Jake muttered, slowly lowering his rifle. He knew what he should do. Call the colony authorities. Let them handle it. This was way above his pay grade. But Jake also knew that by the time anyone official showed up, this creature would probably be dead. And those pups inside her would die too. Jake stood there arguing with himself for another minute. The smart thing was to walk away. The safe thing. But Jake had never been great at doing the smart thing when something needed help. This is stupid, he told himself as he walked back to the house. This is really, really stupid. 20 minutes later, Jake came back with a large bucket of water and most of the dried meat he'd been planning to eat that week. His hands weren't shaking anymore. He'd made his decision, stupid or not. The creature's eyes followed him as he approached. Jake could feel the weight of that stare. Those weren't animal eyes looking at him. Something intelligent watched from behind them, measuring him, judging whether he was a threat. Jake set the bucket and food down about 30 feet away from the creature. Far enough that he could run if this went bad. Close enough that she could reach it if she wanted. Eat or don't, Jake said, backing away slowly. Your choice. I'm not gonna force you. For a long moment nothing happened. The creature just watched him. Jake's heart hammered in his chest. Then with visible effort she dragged herself forward. Her 6 legs barely worked, scraping against the ground. It took her almost 5 minutes to cover those 30 feet. She drank first. The entire bucket. Then she tore into the meat like she hadn't eaten in weeks. Probably hadn't, Jake realized. When she was done she looked at him again. This time something in those eyes looked different. Less wary. Maybe even grateful, though Jake told himself he was probably imagining that part. You're welcome, Jake said. He came back the next evening with more food and water. And the evening after that. Each time the creature seemed a little stronger. Each time, Jake moved a little closer before setting down the supplies. By the 3rd evening, Jake sat down about 10 feet away while she ate. She watched him but didn't seem bothered. Jake started talking mostly because the silence felt weird. You're gonna have those pups soon, he said, eyeing her swollen belly. Probably any day now from the look of things. Hope you know what you're doing because I sure don't. I've helped birth calves and foals but never anything like you. The creature made a low rumbling sound. Not threatening. Almost like she was answering. Jake laughed nervously. Yeah, I'm talking to a giant alien wolf. My mom always said I'd end up crazy living alone out here. Guess she was right. But he came back the next evening anyway. And he'd keep coming back until she didn't need him anymore. Jake was dreaming about his old farm in Montana when the screaming started. His eyes snapped open. For a second he thought maybe he was still dreaming. Then the sound came again. A high-pitched wail that sent ice through his veins. It was coming from outside, somewhere close to the house. Jake threw off his blanket and grabbed his boots, not bothering to tie them. He checked his watch as he stumbled toward the door. 2 a.m. The twin moons cast enough light that he could see across his property without a flashlight. The screaming came from the barn. Jake's heart sank. He knew that sound. He'd heard it before on his family's farm back on Earth. That was the sound of something in labor. Something in trouble. He ran across the yard, his untied boots slapping against the dirt. When he threw open the barn doors, he found her. The massive wolf creature had somehow dragged herself inside and was lying in the hay near the cattle stalls. His cows had backed into the far corner, eyes wide with fear. Okay, Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady even though his hands were shaking. I've done this before. I've birthed calves. This can't be that different. Right? The creature's eyes found his. Even in her pain, she recognized him. She made a low whining sound that nearly broke Jake's heart. He'd been very, very wrong about how different this would be. The first pup came an hour later. Jake had washed his hands and arms in the cattle trough, rolling up his sleeves as high as they'd go. He'd helped the mother as much as she'd let him, supporting her, talking constantly in what he hoped was a soothing voice. When the first pup slid out, Jake's stomach lurched. It wasn't moving. Its tiny body was gray and still. No, Jake muttered, scooping the pup up. It was the size of a large house cat, covered in membrane. Jake wiped its face, clearing the nose and mouth like he'd done with calves. Nothing. The pup's chest wasn't moving. Jake's veterinary training kicked in. He rubbed the pup's chest hard, trying to stimulate circulation. Still nothing. In desperation, he brought the tiny nose to his mouth and breathed gently into it. What? Twice. 3 times. The pup jerked. Its chest expanded. Then it made a sound, a tiny squeaking cry that was the most beautiful thing Jake had ever heard. That's it, Jake said, his voice cracking. Come on, breathe. The mother made a rumbling sound. Jake placed the pup near her, and she immediately started cleaning it with her massive tongue. 3 more pups came over the next 5 hours. Each birth was harder than the last. The second pup came out strong, already squirming and crying. The third needed help, but not as much as the first. By the fourth, the mother was exhausted, barely able to help at all. Jake worked on pure instinct and adrenaline. His shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool night air. His arms ached from supporting the mother, from cleaning pups, from doing whatever needed to be done. He lost track of time. Everything became a blur of movement and sound and desperate hope that each pup would live. The barn smelled like blood and birth and hay. Jake's clothes were covered in fluids he didn't want to think about. His back screamed from bending and kneeling for hours. But he couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. When the first rays of dawn started filtering through the barn's gaps, Jake finally sat back on his heels. 4 pups. All alive. All nursing from their exhausted mother. Jake crawled backward until his back hit the barn wall. He slumped down, too tired to stand, too tired to even move. His entire body shook from exhaustion. He'd been running on fear and determination for 6 hours, and now that it was over, he had nothing left. The mother creature lifted her massive head. Jake watched through bleary eyes as she looked at her pups, then looked at him. Slowly, carefully, she moved her head toward him. Jake was too tired to be scared. She laid her head across his lap. The weight was enormous but somehow comforting. Jake lifted one shaking hand and rested it on her fur. It was softer than he'd expected. You're welcome, Jake whispered. They sat like that for maybe 10 minutes. Jake's eyes kept trying to close. He forced them open, knowing he should get up, should do something. But his body refused to cooperate. Then he noticed the problem. The smallest pup, the last one born, kept getting shoved away from the feeding spots. Its siblings were bigger and stronger, pushing it aside every time it tried to nurse. Jake watched the tiny thing try again and again, getting weaker each time. Damn it, Jake sighed. He knew what happened to runts in nature. They usually didn't make it. But Jake had never been good at accepting that. Come here, little guy, he said, gently scooping up the smallest pup. It made pathetic mewing sounds in his hands. The mother watched but didn't object. Maybe she knew. Maybe she understood what Jake was trying to do. Jake had formula for the calves stored in the barn. He mixed it with some nutrients, warming it slightly. Then he found an old bottle he used for orphan calves. The pup's mouth was different from a calf's, but after some awkward attempts, it figured out how to drink. The pup made soft chirping sounds as it ate, its tiny paws kneading against Jake's arms. When the bottle was empty, it curled up against his chest and fell asleep. Jake looked down at the tiny creature in his arms. Its siblings were 3 times its size. By all natural laws it shouldn't survive. Well, Jake said quietly, good thing I don't care much about natural laws. Jake was in the barn mixing formula for the runt when his emergency radio crackled to life. The voice on the other end belonged to Colony Administrator Peterson, and the man sounded terrified. All residents, this is not a drill. 3 unidentified warships have entered orbit. Military-class vessels. Do not leave your homes. Do not attempt contact. Lock your doors and await further instructions. Jake looked down at the tiny pup in his arms. It made hungry chirping sounds, pawing at the bottle he was preparing. Sorry, buddy, Jake muttered. Don't think I can explain to you why breakfast is delayed because of spaceships. He finished mixing the formula and settled down on an old hay bale. The mother creature, who'd been resting in the corner, lifted her head and made a questioning sound. Her 3 larger pups tumbled around near her, playing and wrestling like normal puppies. Don't worry, Jake told her. Probably just some military exercise. Nothing to do with us. He was wrong about that too. 10 minutes later, Jake heard the sound. A deep rumbling that shook the barn walls. Dust fell from the rafters. His cattle started making nervous sounds from their stalls. Through the barn's open door, Jake saw them land. 3 ships. Each one bigger than his entire farm. They descended from the sky like falling mountains, their engines creating windstorms that flattened his wheat fields. Jake watched his week's work get destroyed in seconds, but somehow that seemed like the least of his problems right now. The ships settled onto his land with thunderous booms. For a moment, everything went quiet. Even the pups stopped playing. Then the doors opened. Jake's radio crackled again. Peterson's voice was barely recognizable, high and panicked. Jake Harper, if you can hear this, stay inside. Do not go outside. They're landing on your property. Military is on the way, but it'll be 30 minutes. Just hide. Please. Jake looked at the bottle in his hand, then at the hungry runt trying to climb up his shirt. Yeah, that's not happening, he said to the radio. He sat back down and started feeding the pup. The little thing latched onto the bottle desperately, making contented sounds. The mother creature moved closer and rested her massive head on Jake's shoulder. She was watching the barn door, alert but not aggressive. Heavy footsteps approached. Not human footsteps. These were heavier, deliberate, multiple sets moving in formation. 12 figures appeared in the barn doorway. Jake looked up from feeding the pup and felt his stomach drop. They were huge. Each one had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. 4 arms, heavily armored in what looked like advanced combat gear. And their faces. Their faces looked like the mother creatures but standing upright, more angular, more predatory. They carried weapons that Jake couldn't identify but that definitely looked capable of killing him in creative ways. The lead figure was the biggest, with scars across his face that suggested he'd seen plenty of combat. He had some kind of translator device on his chest. All 12 of them had weapons drawn and pointed at Jake. They stopped dead when they saw the scene inside. Jake sat cross-legged on the barn floor, bottle feeding a tiny pup. The massive mother creature had her head resting on his shoulder protectively. The 3 larger pups had stopped wrestling and were now climbing over Jake's legs, curious about the visitors but not scared. The silence stretched out. Jake could hear the pup drinking from the bottle, could hear the warrior's breathing, could hear his own heartbeat hammering in his ears. Finally, the lead warrior's translator crackled to life. His voice was deep, confused, almost angry. What is this? Jake looked up at the towering figure and tried to keep his voice steady. Your family, I'm guessing. You must be the dad. He gestured at the pups with his free hand. Congratulations. 4 healthy pups. Well, 3 healthy ones and 1 who needs a little extra help, but he's getting there. The warriors just stared. A few of them lowered their weapons slightly, but their leader kept his trained on Jake. That is my mate, the leader said slowly, his translator struggling with what sounded like strong emotion. Pack mother of the 7th Fleet. How is she here? How are you? What have you done? Helped her, Jake said simply. She showed up outside my fence about a week ago. Pregnant, starving, barely alive. So I fed her. Then she went into labor 2 nights ago. Complicated birth. I helped deliver the pups. Been taking care of them since. The mother creature made a deep rumbling sound. The leader's eyes went wide. His weapon lowered slightly. She speaks to me through our bond, he said, his voice filled with disbelief. She says you saved them. All of them. That you sat with her through the birth. That you refused to give up on the weak one. He pointed at the runt in Jake's arms. That one should have been left behind. Our way is strength. The weak do not survive. Jake looked down at the tiny pup, now falling asleep with a full belly. One of the larger pups had climbed into his lap and was chewing on his boot laces. Yeah, well, Jake said quietly. That's not how we do things where I'm from. The warrior leader stood there, all four arms hanging at his sides, weapons forgotten. He looked at his mate, then at his pups, then at this small human who sat fearlessly surrounded by his family. What are you? The warrior finally asked. Jake shrugged. Just a farmer. They moved Jake into his own house. His house. Like he was the visitor. 6 warriors stood guard outside on his porch. Jake could see them through the window, their massive forms blocking out the afternoon sun. Inside his small living room, 3 more warriors crowded the space, making everything look like doll furniture. Their commander, the scarred one who'd introduced himself as Vrocker, sat across from Jake at his kitchen table. Well, sat was generous. The chair groaned under his weight and his knees came up almost to his chest. He looked ridiculous, but Jake had enough sense not to laugh. Let us begin again, Vrocker said, his translator giving his words a metallic edge. You saved my mate. You delivered my offspring. You fought for the survival of the weakest when nature itself had marked it for death. These are not small things. I know they're not small things, Jake said. He'd been trying to make coffee, but one of the warriors had insisted he sit down. Now his coffee maker sat and used on the counter, mocking him. That's why I did them. Yes. Why? Vrocker leaned forward, and the chair made an alarming creaking sound. That is what I need to understand. What do you want in return? What? Jake blinked. I don't want anything. Territory then. We can grant you land. An entire continent if you wish. I've got 40 acres. That's plenty. Wealth. Precious metals. Technology beyond your colony's understanding. I'm doing fine, thanks. A seat of power. A position in our fleet. Command over systems. Jake rubbed his eyes. He'd been up for nearly 40 hours straight, he'd just delivered 4 alien wolf pups in his barn, and now he had what appeared to be an alien warlord sitting in his kitchen offering him planets. This was not how he'd planned his week. I want you folks off my porch so I can feed my cattle, Jake said. It's already past noon. They're probably pretty annoyed with me by now. Vrocker's translator made an angry clicking sound. The warriors standing guard shifted, hands moving toward weapons. You mock me, Vrocker said, his voice low and dangerous. I'm not mocking anyone, Jake said, too tired to be properly scared. I'm serious. My animals need feeding. That's not a joke. You saved the pack mother. Do you understand what this means? You have been granted unlimited favor with the 7th Fleet. With the entire Empire. Name your price. Anything you desire can be yours. There is no price, Jake said slowly. I'm just glad your mate and the pups are okay. That's it. That's all I wanted. Vrocker stood up so fast the chair fell over backward. He loomed over Jake, all 4 arms spread wide in what might have been confusion or rage or both. This makes no sense, he said. Every species has an angle. Every creature seeks advantage. What is yours? Jake stayed seated. He was too tired to stand, and honestly standing wouldn't make him any less small compared to this guy. Look, Jake said, I don't know how your people work. Maybe you've got some complicated system of debts and favors. Fine. But where I come from, things are simpler. You see someone in trouble, you help them. You don't ask for payment. You don't calculate what you'll get out of it. You just help because it's the right thing to do. We call it being decent. One of the female warriors spoke up. She was slightly smaller than the others but still easily 7 feet tall. Commander, she said, I accessed their colony databases while we waited. There are references to something called humanity. It appears to be a cultural trait. They value acts without self-interest. Protection of the vulnerable is considered honorable? Impossible, Vrocker said flatly. No species operates that way. It defies basic survival instinct. We do, Jake said quietly. Or we try to, anyway. We don't always succeed, but we try. Why? Vrocker demanded. What benefit does this bring your species? Jake thought about that. Makes us human, I guess. Makes us better than we were. Look, I can't explain it in a way that'll make sense to you. But I can tell you this, if I'd walked away from your mate, left her to die, I could have had all the wealth and power in the universe, and I'd still feel like garbage every time I thought about it. A small sound came from near Jake's feet. The runt pup had followed him from the barn, wobbling on unsteady legs. It sat down on Jake's boot and looked up at him with those 2 intelligent eyes, making soft whining sounds. The weak one follows you, Vrocker observed. Yeah, he's been doing that. Probably just imprinted because I've been feeding him. Remove it, Vrocker ordered one of the warriors. The warrior bent down and tried to pick up the pup. Immediately the little thing started crying. Not the soft chirps Jake had heard before, but genuine distress calls. Its siblings in the barn answered with their own cries. Stop, Jake said, picking up the pup. It immediately quieted, curling against his chest. You're scaring him. The pack mother's voice carried from the barn, a deep rumbling sound that made the windows rattle. Vrocker's eyes went distant for a moment. She says the pup has chosen you, Vrocker said slowly. As pack. As family. That's nice? But I don't think. You do not understand. This is not a choice. The pup has bonded. To separate you now would destroy it. The bond is sacred. Unbreakable. Jake looked down at the tiny creature in his arms. It had fallen asleep, one small paw resting on his thumb. So what are you saying? The pup is yours now. Your responsibility. Your family. Jake sighed. Guess I'm a dog owner now. That is not a dog. Close enough. The first week after the fleet arrived was chaos. Jake's farm became the most watched piece of land in the entire colony. News crews tried to get past the warrior guards. The colonial government sent 3 different officials to assess the situation. Scientists wanted to study the pups. Everyone had opinions about what Jake should do next. Jake ignored all of them and focused on his wheat. By the end of the first month, things had settled into a strange new normal. The Empire officially declared Jake's farm sacred ground, which sounded impressive until Jake realized what it actually meant. 4 warriors stayed behind as honor guards, which was a fancy way of saying they lived in his barn and followed him around all day. At first, Jake found it annoying. He'd catch them watching him feed the chickens like he was performing some sacred ritual. But after a week they started helping. Turned out that being strong enough to carry battle armor could also carry hay bales without breaking a sweat. Why do you feed the weak one the same as the others? One of the warriors asked him one morning. Her name was something Jake couldn't pronounce, so she told him to call her Kay. Jake was bottle-feeding Buddy while the other 3 pups nursed from their mother. Because he's hungry, same as them. But he is smaller. Weaker. By our ways, he should receive less until he proves his strength. By my ways, he gets fed because he's part of the family, Jake said. Size doesn't matter. Kay didn't look convinced, but she stopped questioning it. Jake named the runt Buddy, which Vrocker said was an undignified name for one of my bloodline. Jake pointed out that Vrocker didn't have to live with him, so Buddy it was. The pup grew stronger every day. With regular feeding and Jake's constant attention, Buddy started catching up to his siblings. He'd never be as big as them probably, but he was scrappy. Smart too. Within 2 weeks he'd figured out how to unlatch the barn door. Within 3 he'd learned to herd Jake's cattle by watching the farm dogs that belonged to Jake's neighbor 5 miles down the road. Vrocker visited every few days to check on his mate and children. Each time he'd stand at the edge of Jake's porch watching with those intense eyes. Jake pretended not to notice and went about his work. One evening, about 6 weeks after the birth, Vrocker found Jake in the yard playing fetch with Buddy. The pup had grown to the size of a large dog now, his purple-gray fur shimmering in the setting sun. You truly don't see it as weak? Vrocker asked, watching Buddy sprint across the field to retrieve a stick. Him, Jake corrected. Not it. And no, he's not weak. He is smaller than his siblings. He just needed a little extra help getting started. Jake threw the stick again. Buddy bounded after it with obvious joy, his 6 legs carrying him in a slightly awkward but enthusiastic gallop. Where I'm from, we measure strength differently. It's not about who's biggest or who can fight the hardest. It's about not giving up. About pushing forward even when things are hard. By that measure, Buddy's the strongest of all of them. Vrocker watched in silence as Buddy brought the stick back, tail wagging. The pup dropped it at Jake's feet and then noticed Vrocker. Instead of cowering, Buddy walked right up to his father and made a demanding sound. He wants you to throw the stick, Jake said, trying not to smile. Vrocker looked at the stick, then at his son, then back at Jake. Slowly he picked up the stick with one of his 4 hands and threw it. Buddy took off like a shot. He likes you, Jake said. I do not understand you, Vrocker admitted. Any of you. Your species makes no logical sense. Yeah, we get that a lot. Word spread. Not just through the colony but out into the wider galaxy. Humans, these strange creatures who helped without wanting anything in return. The species that protected the weak instead of abandoning them. The people who measured strength by compassion rather than conquest. Some species thought it was a trick. Others thought humans were simply stupid. But a few, a small but growing number, started asking questions. Started wondering if maybe there was another way to live. A full year passed. The pups grew into their full size. Buddy, true to Jake's prediction, stayed smaller than his siblings but developed a reputation for being clever and loyal. The pack mother and her children visited once a month, and Jake's farm became a regular gathering spot. The warriors who'd stayed as guards became Jake's friends, though they'd never admitted in those words. Then the ambassadors started arriving. Jake was fixing a section of fence when he saw the transport ship land. Out stepped 3 beings from different species, all wearing official-looking clothes and carrying data pads. Buddy, now full-grown and lounging in the shade nearby, lifted his head and watched them approach. "Jake Harper?" the lead ambassador asked. He was some kind of reptilian species with scales that changed color when he talked. "That's me," Jake said, not putting down his hammer. "The Galactic Council would like to understand something. You are one human. One farmer on a backwater colony world. Yet you have single-handedly changed the Empire's policies toward their own young. They now provide extra care for weaker offspring instead of letting nature take its course. How did you do this? What was your strategy?" Jake wiped sweat from his forehead. "Didn't have a strategy. I just saw someone who needed help and I helped. That's what you're supposed to do." "But why?" another ambassador pressed. "What did you gain from this?" Jake looked down at Buddy, who had moved to sit at his feet. The massive creature was making rumbling sounds that Jake had learned meant contentment. Jake reached down and scratched behind Buddy's ears right where he liked it. "I gained a friend," Jake said simply. "Sometimes that's enough." The ambassadors looked at each other, confused. They left an hour later, still not understanding. But across the galaxy, humanity's reputation was spreading. Not as the strongest species or the smartest or the most technologically advanced. Those titles belonged to others. Instead, humans became known as the species that remembered what others had forgotten. That strength without compassion meant nothing. That power without purpose was hollow. The species that helped because it was right, not because it was profitable. The species that never left anyone behind. And on a small farm on Haven's Edge, Jake Harper continued his work, a massive alien wolf creature at his side, proving every day that sometimes the simplest acts could change everything.